Hello and welcome to another Spotlight on a Leader as part of our Manager to Leader Shift program. It's always a delight to bring other leaders here on the program. So you're not just hearing me bang on about why we should lead well, but it's really good to hear inspiration, motivation, tips, and ideas from other leaders who are doing those things as well. And so you'll see here on my screen, I have this amazing guest with me today, Jim Kelly. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, AJ. Thank you. What an honour to be invited to be involved in this. I know you did work with some very esteemed leaders, so yeah, we're very privileged. Thank you.
Oh, well, I wanted to bring Jim on. So, Jim currently works at SafeWork, which is somewhere that many of you know. I worked earlier in my career when I was in government. And what I love about Jim and everything I hear around the grapevine about Jim is that not only is he an experienced people leader, but he's really passionate about the potential of people, of empowering people. And whilst he's in that workplace safety kind of environment and a regulator, he has this, I think, a bit more of a commercial approach and a lot more of that humanistic, encouraging kind of approach to leadership, where he knows that when we respect our people as leaders, when we take care of them, safety is a byproduct of that, of having a good culture and leading well. And so I wanted to bring you in, Jim, to share a little bit about your career journey. What have been some of the lessons and things that you've learned along the way that might help some of the people tuning in? So
Thanks,
can we
thanks,
start
AJ.
there? How did you begin in your career? Like go back to way first job. What did it look like?
Yeah, and I'm really pleased just with the way you described that because I never wanted to be a public servant. I always wanted to go down the commercial path. I feel like I've got a
Right.
bit of entrepreneurial about me. I've
Uh-huh.
never really explored that to any great extent, but it's interesting that you pick up on that kind of commercial acumen because it's something I certainly pride myself on and try and keep in touch with the real world out there. I think it's really important for government to do that at the very least.
Mm.
One of my first jobs was with I worked at Lowe's Menswear back at the school days, and it was convenient. It worked at the time, and got lots of socks and undies nice and cheap, and learned customer service skills and learned basic management skills, and even at that early age, I had an opportunity. They were looking for people for their management program and things like that, and they said, "Oh, if you wanted to, you could pursue to be a Lowe's manager. We'll put you through our internal training program and go down that path." And it certainly didn't appeal to me. I got pretty sick of folding clothes and dealing with
Mhm.
customers. But I learned so much from that first sort of interaction. And it was
Mm.
kind of a taste of leadership, maybe even though it's early 15, 16 years of age. My passion was really health and safety and well-being right
Right.
from an early age. I kind of wanted to be a physiotherapist in year 10 at school, did my work experience
Mhm.
in physio. Didn't get the marks for physio,
Mhm.
and knew I kind of was not even in the ball game for physiotherapy at the time academically. So I looked at other options, and occupational therapy was the one that came up for me. And again, I fell short. Year 12 was too good a year and didn't get the marks I needed for AT. It was quite a high bar, but I went into health science, human movement science, first year
Mm.
of university, and transferred across to occupational therapy in my second year of study in Newcastle, where I still live now. So I did occupational therapy and continued to work at Lowe's throughout university holidays, and as well as doing assistant nursing and all sorts of bits and pieces throughout the uni days as you do to pay the bills. But my passion was always working with people, health,
Mm.
safety, and well-being. Um, but at the time of doing occupational therapy, it was all around work-related rehabilitation and potentially to work in the private sector to look at helping injured workers get back to work. And
Mm.
what I loved about that was the variety of the work. Every workplace was different. Just from the work experience I'd done in the early years, I remember one day going into a dental assistant, helping a dental assistant return to work in the morning, and going onto a floating dock in Newcastle in the afternoon. And they were worlds apart, and I had the privilege of seeing different jobs and seeing what works, what doesn't work, and the challenges about that. And that really appealed to me, to work with people in the work environment who've overcome adversity or challenges in terms of interworkers. So that kind of really inspired my direction and a career path. So yeah, occupational therapy. First interview outside of uni was with the Commonwealth Rehab Service, and my mother at the time said, "Oh, get a job in the public service because they'll train you really well. Then you can go out in the private sector." So I did that, got an interview, got a job, worked in the Commonwealth Rehab for a number of years, and it was a great role, really rewarding. great training, working with a bunch of people similar age to me, where we worked hard and party hard and had a really good time, and learnt so much and got really good exposure to both public and private sector rehabilitation. So I continued that variety of work and injured workers. But very quickly, I kind of learnt that it can be really bring you down dealing with injured workers and the consequences of workplace injury and illness over time. So I did a little bit of travel overseas and worked in a hospital overseas as a pure OT in the old neuroscience and spinal injury space, which was really interesting. But career-wise, I could see a path down that work-related rehab space and moving more into prevention. I wanted to prevent injury rather than rehabilitate injury. So opportunities came up in that regard where I moved into, I did a little bit of study. I did a graduate certificate in health and safety prevention, and then moved into an early intervention role primarily with Centrelink, which was a large Commonwealth agency. They were looking for an occupational therapist to pretty much problem solve musculoskeletal disorders. That was their big item at the time, and I did thousands of workstation assessments in the first 12 months of this pilot program, essentially. And during that time, I realised that's not the way to fix MSD injuries. You've got to prevent them. You can't just treat them. So I basically created my own role and put forward a business case to say you need to focus on injury prevention and early intervention, not just the early intervention piece. So it gradually turned into a dedicated role for health and safety, and that opened doors for me and really for where the leadership opportunities started to come up. So it was initially a technical role and a health and safety prevention role, but from there, some doors opened as well.
It's really interesting. I think lots of people go from that technical to then into leadership and management. And I'm curious about, did you earlier in your career have a bit of a plan for that's where I want to go, or were you just taking each opportunity as it came?
Yeah, I think the early plan was like the advice from Mum: go and get trained in the public service and go and work for a private rehab provider. I grew up in Coffs Harbour in the North Coast, and the plan was always to go back there, but things don't always go to plan. Started to form relationships and get good, secure employment, and the pay wasn't too bad too. So the risk of leaving the public service, which was secure at the time, helped me do the overseas travel, really tied me down. Plus friendship networks and all the rest of it did as well. And eventually marriage and children. So those ties really kept me in Newcastle. And the employment also kept me in Newcastle too. I was getting challenged and stimulated and getting opportunities. So when I was with Centrelink, I had the opportunity to do a secondment out of the national office in Canberra. So sort of flying in and out of Canberra from Newcastle for 12 months. Was a maternity leave backfill. And that was the OHS advisor role for the country for 26,000 Centrelink workers. So
wow,
that was a pretty rare opportunity that came up, mainly through that relationship that I built over time for our regional area in the Hunter, with the national office in Canberra. And we made it work. It was challenging, some long days and flying in and out on the flying cigar from Newcastle to Canberra. But I learned so much. We prepared for the bird flu pandemic at the time, not realising that bird flu didn't take off, but eventually COVID did. So I learned a lot around pandemic planning through that role, which is fascinating. I dealt with regulators investigating Centrelink at the time for all sorts of different breaches. I flew out to Northern Territory and did some remote OHS risk assessments in remote Aboriginal communities in Northern Territory, which is fantastic. Pretty much got to every state for different reasons as part of the role. So that was an incredible career opportunity for me, and one that I was able to do in an outposted capacity. So opportunities sort of came up. So there's definitely a bit of luck, but it's also that relationship management was absolutely critical for me. Proving myself and creating a job, not waiting for the job to be created for me. Otherwise, I would still be doing workstation assessments if I had to stay in that OT role. So I designed a basic database by putting on the IT experts and said, I need to capture this information and turn it into some data that will help me plan and prevent these injuries. I shared that with the national office, and they kind of liked that, and they said we need to do this nationally, and that kind of helped me get into the national role. And then when I came back from that maternity leave backfill to the Hunter role, I kind of thought, well, what's next for me? Where do I go from here? Because it felt like a bit of a backward step. And that's when talking to my HR manager at the time, they needed someone. I think she was off to do another stint somewhere else. They needed someone to fill in the HR manager space, and I said, "Well, I'll take that on. I'll give that a go." And that was my first line management responsibility. Relatively young at the time. I think it would have been maybe late 20s. And it was only a team of probably 9 people, but they were very experienced HR advisors and specialists who'd been around for a long time, but didn't have necessarily leadership aspirations. So it was a steep learning curve. I was younger than most of them, and trying to tell experienced people how to lead, I suppose, and manage. But what I learned through that role was we were providing advice and expertise to 60 odd managers across the region about all things HR, and it was a really empowering position. It was I was very dependent on my team underneath me and on the advice we got from the national office. So I wasn't an expert. I didn't claim to be an expert. I'd never managed people.
Right.
Yet here I'm providing experienced managers with advice around all things HR. So it was a bit of a luck to get that opportunity, but it was also that relationship management piece that was really key for me as well. And then learning on the run of how to trust people that either reported to me or the advisors that would give me advice to make sure that we provided quality advice to our customers.
Gosh, there's so much. We've only got like 10 minutes, and I'm like, oh, I could go all sorts of places. There's so much in all of that. I love that you took opportunities when they arose. And I think that's that whole luck is, when opportunity meets with preparation. So you were clearly, you did some extra study, you were doing the work on yourself, you were making yourself available. You were also creative in developing databases and seeing problems and opportunities that you could have some solution around. And I love that you see the power of relationships. And I think that's super important. And in the program, we talk a lot about building first a peer-to-peer network so that you've got those other people who are on the journey too, but then also going, who else do I need to network with? Often it's above first, but then later industry-wide and outside of the organization. One thing I want to come back to is you sound quite ahead of your time with understanding the need for the prevention rather than just fixing a problem. And also, the musculoskeletal was initially a challenge. But I know from my time at Safe Work that it really shifted to being more psychosocial issues once PPE and managing those physical hazards got better. We started to see more of that. What do you think has helped you tap into those trends and kind of have the balls, shall I say, to jump in and see those things? Because a lot of people I talk to in government, where there are so many opportunities, they'll see stuff, but they'll be like, oh no, that's not my role or my remit, or I shouldn't, tread there. So what was it, do you think, that gave you that insight and then the courage to follow through on those things?
It's a great question, AJ, and it's something I have to think about it because it happened at the time. So the MST example, that was the hot issue of the time, particularly for Centrelink, and they thought the solution was give people a workstation assessment and the problem will be fixed. I knew, and probably from my basic training as an occupational therapist, that was not going to solve the problem. You kind of had to look at what was causing the issues, and I was seeing a lot of repetition and a lot of similar scenarios appearing, like certain databases or software that people were using was causing mouse issues. So you need to fix the software, not fix the person. And I had to capture that data. So therefore I found the IT person to help me capture it. And then that painted a story, and I was able to sell that story, I suppose, to my leaders at the time to invest in moving towards prevention. And they trusted. And I think that you build your business case and that enables you to take action. To some extent, that's the same kind of story that happened with the psych space down the track. So after Centrelink, and I did a stint in that HR role, I kind of had a bit of a career path to decide on. Do I want to go down a human resources journey, or do I want to stay in my health, safety, and wellbeing sort of passion area? HR to me was a little bit more in the negative space, and it doesn't always have to be, but it was, and from what my experience was at the time. And health, safety, and wellbeing was more preventative and helping people to not have problems in the first place. So that's kind of where I wanted to stay. So I chose not to stick with HR, even though that was kind of, I was being pulled in that direction at the time, and was actively looking for a new role outside of something. and I always followed work cover at the time, and thought the brand was really strong, and thought and you probably had a bit to do with that brand back then, and also I thought if you want to do safety, doing it with a safety regulator is the place to be. So I was always watching and looking for an inspector job. They never really came up in the Newcastle region. Newcastle inspectors are pretty stable, but a team leader position, a team coordinator position came up. So that's when I jumped across to the regulator. Managed a team of 10 to 12 inspectors, and that was really confronting because we employ inspectors to be assertive and confident and strong people in the community, and
Yes.
they are exactly that to their managers as well. So it can be really challenging to manage inspectors, particularly when some of them wanted that job when I came in. So I didn't exactly get to welcome that. And I'd been a HR manager in the 12 months prior to that, so I had to take some of my own advice and say, well, what would you be advising other managers? Because it's a lot easier to give advice than it is to take it yourself. So I learned a lot about that practical hands-on leadership in that first 12 months or so, managing a team of inspectors. And that was real boots on the ground, operational, tactical kind of leadership, building on the theoretical leadership I probably learned in the HR space. And then I started to weigh up my options about career-wise where I want to go. So I didn't really get into the psych space until the last 6 or 7 years, where we saw that as a strategic challenge for New South Wales and for the regulator, and the workers' compensation data, the claims numbers were driving that. So again, using the business intelligence, the data that we had available to say, well, how are we going to solve this problem? And I suppose that's where having the guts to challenge the norm and to start to look at, well, what can we do about that? So if you jump forward to where we've been in the last 10 years, it is really looking at that data, looking at the environment around us and saying, well, New South Wales is just one of many regulators. We are committed to a harmonised model, but do we have to wait for the harmonised model to change things?
Right.
We were really fortunate to have a minister at the time who was very passionate about mental health and said, I want to do something in space. And that was our burning platform to some extent. Well, here we go. If you are happy to deviate from the harmonised model for a period of time, we can go alone in the code of practice. And we designed the first code of practice in the country. Did a lot of work. We thought that was going to be really challenging because it's the first code that really applies to every industry and every worker in every workplace. Most other codes are kind of construction related for a scaffold or formwork for concrete work. This was every industry, every worker, had to be really, really broad and general, and again, meaningful consultation, relationship management, listening to both sides of the story, helped us build a document that regulations and the national code and regulations across the country. So something we are immensely proud of, but it was that being open-minded, not just accepting the fact that there's a barrier there we can't overcome, you can't change legislation. Well, you can. We just did it.
Yeah.
Not accepting the fact that they've employed me to do early intervention as an OT. Well, hold on, why don't we prevent that as opposed to just treat the problem? So I think encountering those barriers and just being really open-minded and trying to find a way, using the data and the intelligence and the business case to challenge it has been really rewarding for me and something kept me on my toes, that's for sure.
I love all of that for so many reasons. I think I really like that leadership is sometimes about balancing the data and the hard stuff with the soft skills and the consultation and the engagement piece. And quite often when technical people jump into a leadership role, they bring all their technicality with them, which is awesome, but they don't always understand that emotional intelligence and the human side to come with it. So it sounds like you've woven those together really beautifully. And I think it is that commercial savviness that I noted earlier when I was introducing you is looking at the data and going, what does this mean and what can we actually use and do about that? So I'm thinking for all the leaders listening, be on, have your nose to the ground, be looking for those opportunities. Don't shy away from looking at the data and what it's telling you and what the trends are telling you, but then also get out there and talk to people. I know I can remember doing campaigns in construction when I was there, and we saw trends in things and injuries happening. And we could have gone down the route of a certain intervention straight away, but we actually went out and talked on sites for quite a while and realized the reality of the workers was a bit different to what we thought. Because of the nature of the transient workers going site to site, we couldn't introduce something that was site specific because the workers moved around, and so did a lot of the gear and equipment. And so it's often looking at and interrogating data, but then going, let's go and actually see what it means in reality. So I think that's great that you had that insight and perception to bring all of that together.
And I think if you are career orientated, and the role you're in at present is not the role you want to be in forever, then you've got to go beyond what the role description says. So if I look at that OT stint, they employed me to do workstation assessments. That was not what I went there for.
Yeah.
I did that was a big part of my job, but I used the 20% of my time or capacity to create that into something that I really wanted to do, where my passion lied and where I thought the evidence was suggesting it needs to be. And a little bit the same with the more recent role. We're told to do compliance and enforcement around the legislation, but if the legislation needs to be changed, I need to find a way to change it. And that's that 80-20 rule. 80% of your job you need to do because it's part of your role description, but the 20% is where the opportunities lie that enable you to push the boundaries, to start to go a bit beyond and look at, well, what's important to your leaders, what's important to me, and how can I make those outcomes achieved.
And I think that's a real key for leaders, is not just to go, that can't be done, or there's no way we could change the legislation or whatever, but to go, how could we do that? What might it look like? And what you're saying, that's why I was cheering about, it's not just what's in your job description. Last week, I was facilitating a group of 35 leaders, and I actually had them write down, what do you get paid for? And when they really looked at it, and I'm like, what do you really get paid for? What's the difference and the value that you bring? For the majority of them, and these were all statewide leaders, for the majority of them, it was not much that was in their PD.
Yeah.
And their position description was quite broad and general. And they were like, really? I get paid to do this. This is the value I bring, or this is why the CEO needs me, So it is that sometimes not being too rigid and having flexibility around the opportunity. And I think in our PD, there's a certain amount, but each individual that does that role over the time can add different things because of their own interests and their background, just as you have with your OT, interest and background, and your interest in healthy well-being. Yeah.
The other word I want to pick up, and what you're saying there too, AJ, is value. Always look to where you can add value. And I'm noticing as a director now, I do a lot of approvals, and I'm always reviewing things and rubber stamping them, sending out the line. And I really have to pick up myself and challenge and say, well, where do I add value? My job is just not to approve things and send them up the line. I've got to look at, well, how can I add value to this? I'm just one of a number in a chain in government, and my value add is obviously joining the pieces across the directorate that I lead, or across the business that I'm across. But looking for the opportunity to add value, and I think throughout the whole career, that's what it's always been about, is finding those opportunities.
100%. So I guess to wrap us up and to come to a conclusion, sounds like someone's ringing you already. See, I knew we were near our time. If you were to give your top level career tips to anyone else who's looking to move into a directorship role or those more strategic senior leadership, what would be your quick tips for them?
One quote that came to me only recently, and it's been around for a long time, is what got you here won't get you there. And I think that kind of captures a lot of what we've just talked about in terms of looking for opportunities to add value, challenge your role description, go above and beyond, and add that value, because it's the bit you add on top is what's going to demonstrate where you're going to get to next. So that's the opportunity to leverage relationships, to think strategically, to build your own skills and capability. Because if you keep doing what the role description says, that's where you're going to stay. But if you want to go somewhere, then look at, well, what are they looking for? And that is a strategic thinking, is a leadership skills, communication, relationships, or is it technical skills, depending on where you want to take your path. And then build that into that 20% of your job. So 80% of your job is what the role description might say. 20% is where you want to take it, and where you want to take yourself. And I think, to me, that's been a real eye-opener for me, is what got you here won't get you there. So where do you want to get to, and how do you build that into your current role and look for those opportunities?
Love it. That is so fantastic. And I couldn't agree more. It's always that Pareto 80-20 kind of rule. And that 20% is the stretch. And there was some research recently by the Mayo Clinic that showed we only need to love our work 20% of the time in order for it to be fulfilling and keep us coming back. So
Yeah.
that's that 20% again. So thank you so much, Jim. My final quick question is the jacket you're wearing from Lowe's?
No, it's not. I've moved on from the Lowe's wardrobe over the years.
But it's often the way, right? Those foundational skills. I talked to lots of people who started out at McDonald's and they say, I learned so much about management and systems and getting people to do things the right way.
Yeah.
So, who would have known back then when you were folding t-shirts and shirts that you'd be where you're at today? But all I can say is the people who do work for you and with you and collaborate with you are very fortunate to have a leader like you who gets that holistic view of the workplace and is truly out there to make a difference in our communities and keep people safe and well so they can go home safe to their families. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and wisdom with us today. It's been great.
Thanks, AJ. And the leader is only as good as the people they lead. And for me, that's one of the most important things we do is to recruit the right people, to develop the right people. And if you do that really well, then it makes you a really good leader. So that means a lot to me. So thank you for that. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for your time.
Will do. Thanks, AJ.